Hello and welcome to Unacademy. I welcome you all to the Hindu analysis. We'll be discussing 7 to 8 important articles, two related to each other today. But before we begin, good morning to all of you. Two very important announcements for you. First, that the 22,999 plus 12 months extension offer is running right now. You have to use the code IAS English to be tagged to our team. But more important is that we are having a summit in which we are having special classes, free classes for everyone. And as part of the 3-day event, today on the 19th, we will have at 8 p.m. Sarmad sir talking about the analysis of the previous year questions from 2013 to 2025. Thereafter, I'll be meeting you after this session at 1 on the Unacademy platform, where I'll be discussing the complete medieval Indian history through timelines. Yesterday we discussed ancient India through timelines in that regard. Today we'll discuss medieval, and tomorrow we'll discuss modern India through timelines. Thereafter, we also have an interesting session by Mukesh sir, who will be talking about Indian physical environment. He'll be meeting you at 5, and at 6 p.m. Aastha ma'am will be talking about answer writing, and therefore you have 1, 5, 6 and 8, 4 very interesting sessions lined up for you today, where previous year analysis of polity, I'll be teaching medieval India, and thereafter we have Mukesh sir talking about Indian physical environment, and last but not the least, mains answer writing. So today and tomorrow, the last, you can say, the 2 days of this, you can say, process through which we are making education accessible and good learning on a free platform. So you just have to follow the link in the description box and you can register for all of these sessions. Good morning. I hope that you were a part of this yesterday and you will be a part of it today and tomorrow also. So do use this opportunity to you can experience the platform itself and understand what Unacademy stands for. Okay. Now, these are the 6 to 7 topics which we are going to discuss today. The first 4 are quite heavy and are technical also, with a lot of data. And as always, I have tried to simplify them into tables and data which you can use in the examination. This PPT will be an important resource for you, because I have actually brought down that 1,000, 2,000 words into 2 to 3, 5 tables, so that you can understand everything in the best way possible. So we'll talk about a new way of understanding poverty in India and something called the Thali method. Very interesting that way. Then we'll talk about how India has taken a certain stance vis-a-vis what has happened in Doha and Qatar. And we will also take this into context with what has happened with Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. These two have to be read together. Then we'll talk about why Maharashtra there's a protest, onion farmers, what are the reasons, what are the ways to go forward. And also an interesting way of how SDG 3 we are still far off. We have to discuss that also. Last is, as a mounting pressure on Iran and in India, we have the Chabahar port, you can say, sanctions or the waiver has been removed. So we'll talk about all of these things together. GS paper 2 and 3 heavy, but important for the examination generally. Good morning. Now, remember, this has to be a two-way interaction. You have to tell me if you're following. If there's any question, I feel free to answer, ask the questions in the chat box, and do engage, because that is the whole point of this session. I will, as I do always, teach you, make you learn everything here itself, and we'll revise before we move forward. Okay. So the first topic is about food consumption and the concept of poverty, and the context is very interesting. The context is that there was one report which came in 2024 in February, which is called the NSS Household Consumption Survey. Thereafter, just in April, the World Bank released something called Poverty and Equity Brief India 2025. And under that, the World Bank made a very interesting claim. And that claim was that extreme poverty, living on less than $2.15 per day, fell from 16.2% to 2.3% of the population itself by 2022-23. Now, according to the World Bank, there has been a significant drop in poverty in India, and that to the extreme form, and therefore poverty rates in India is declining. But if you look around yourself, and this is a very, you can say, qualitative question. If you look around yourself, can you say that there has been a significant drop in the poverty rates in India, or extreme poverty in India has been fully eliminated, or is at 2.3% in that regard? And the answer to that question is no. If you look around, there are lower middle class, lower income groups, but the concept of the poverty line as it is very, very complicated in India. But the idea is, if you go by a qualitative analysis of what is happening in and around you, if you go to rural India, you will realize that this data does not add up. This data does not add up, and poverty in India cannot be at 2.3% at extreme level when everything else is not reflecting that. Now, this is the starting point of these two researchers to develop a new method. Now, before we talk about the new method itself, you have to understand what are the types of methods which have been used previously. So, when we talk about the Dandekar, Rath, or the Alag committee, they used to use what is called as the calorie method. That if you are consuming 2400 calories and 2100 calories in a rural and urban India, then you are above. If you are consuming more than these calories, or you're meeting this, then you are above the poverty line. If you aren't, then you are below the poverty. This is quite problematic because you can't just base everything on consumption. And as it is, this consumption data was not very well, you can say, accounted for or created for. Thereafter, we have the Tendulkar committee and the Rangarajan committee. And these two changed the concept a little bit, wherein, yes, they were using consumption data, but they started to account for the concept of poverty through income, which is through expenditure. So though they were using the same data, the idea was that if you're spending, for example, 814 rupees and 788 rupees, then you are above the poverty line. And Rangarajan and Tendulkar, what they did was, they became multifaceted, which is just using calories. Now they started to talk about expenditure on non-food items. For example, Rangarajan committee started to also take into account the concept of food and non-food items. Now, this is something which is pure economics, something which Shyam sir will as it is teach you, which is how poverty accounting has happened over the years, from Dandekar to Raj to Alag to the concept of Tendulkar and Rangarajan. The idea is, from calorie, we move to income based on the idea of how much you're spending. It was based on expenditure method rather than calorific method. Now, these two researchers argue that India had used the calorific method half a century ago, and the way you talk about a physiological approach, it is not very good, or it is not very accurate. And therefore, they want to now say that we need to move beyond calories. We need to move beyond just expenditure. So therefore, they are talking about a new method which is called the Thali method. Now, why am I having this discussion with you is because this can be a bouncer in the mains examination. Randomly, you can get a question on what is the Thali method. Or for example, how calorie-based or consumption-based accounting has not been good enough, or there's a need to change an approach. If they're asking you to change the approach, you need certain examples, you need certain concepts which you can use in the examination. So that is where you can use the concept of the Thali method. Now, what have we established till this point? We've established till this point that looking around in India, in rural and urban India, we can't say that extreme poverty has reduced. However, World Bank's data and the report would say that the poverty has gone from 16% to 2.3%. Now, what we have used previously is calorific method, but that is already quite flawed in its understanding. Thereafter, Tendulkar and Rangarajan committee further complicated the understanding by talking about expenditure based on consumption, based on the idea if you're spending a certain amount, thereafter, or you're spending a certain amount in food and non-food items, you are therefore above and below the poverty line. They would argue that we need to further complicate this concept, and now we need to develop a concept which can take into account 4 to 5 concepts together. 4 to 5 concepts together. Now, if you understand till this point what I'm trying to argue, what are we trying to do here? It's a pure conjecture. The government of India does not follow it. It is just an alternative concept. These are concepts which are introduced as alternative concepts, where they're trying to give you a new method which they have devised. If you understand that this is not indicative of what government of India is using as of right now, but is a new concept, I would like to now talk about the thali method, on what are they talking about with this concept of thali, and how is it new, how is it different in that regard. Are we clear? Can I move to the second part of the discussion? If I've established to you what we are trying to do here, I want everybody's yes sir, we understand what you're trying to say. Yes, let's try to talk about the thali method in that regard. Again, don't use it in the examination as a method of accounting for the concept of poverty. Perfect, beautiful. Now, they said that, see, calorific method made sense to some level. It has its own merits and demerits. But let's take into account not just the calories, but the nutrition. Nutrition meaning how much, you can say, carbohydrates I am taking, how much protein I am taking, how much vitamins I am taking, and therefore a thali in India represents a balanced and self-sufficient diet. The idea that if I have to, and across India, across the different landscapes of India, a thali always exists, wherein you have the Maharashtrian thali, you have the Gujarati thali, you have the South, you have the Karnataka thali, you have the Punjabi thali. Everyone has their own version of it, and in every version you will have some cereals, mostly either wheat or rice. It will have some form of protein. If it is a vegetarian source, it will have paneer. If it is a non-vegetarian source, it may have chicken, fish, whatever it may be. And therefore, thalis exist. There may be some form of yogurt, there may be fermented foods, there may be some form of sweet. It's a complete diet. Now, this is where the first disjuncture is. So let's try to understand in the thali method, what is the first thing which is different? The first thing which is different is it takes into account nutrition, which is what are the proteins, what are the carbohydrates, what are the vitamins. This is the first way in which it takes into account calories also, but it also takes into account the concept of nutrition. The second is, if I have to use thalis as a way of accounting for poverty or as a form of expenditure, what data should I use? The data I use is household consumption expenditure, meaning how much is a household spending on certain forms of consumption. Now, this is where they have been a little bit interesting. The way they have also made it more holistic, the thali method has been made more holistic, is that it also takes into account not just the concept of food. It takes into account rent, transportation, telephone, health maintenance, education, everything else. So if you are using the thali method, you are accounting for non-food and food expenditure both, and therefore food is a residual expenditure rather than the primary expenditure. This was one of the issues with the calorific method, or be it Tendulkar or be it the Rangarajan committee, which is, though Rangarajan tried to complicate it further, food is not the first expenditure which we take. Food and the quality of food which we use is purely based on the concept of what is the expenditure on other things. So the second disjuncture here is, it is more holistic because it takes into account food as a residual expenditure over and above the other expenditures which are made as a way of sustenance. Meaning, if you have to maintain a certain living standard, you have to spend, and that spending is taken into account. Now, based on this concept, based on the concept of nutrition and food as a residual expenditure, they come up with a very interesting data. The data is that according to the CRISIL, a rating agency's report, a thali which has rice, dal, vegetables, roti, curd and salad should cost rupees 30 in India according to the inflation. A home cooked thali, not a Haldiram's thali, but a home cooked thali. A home cooked thali for one person should be rupees 30 if I take into account one cereal, one protein, one vegetable, another cereal, a fermented concept and some form of salad, rupees 30. Now, based on this understanding, this is the data which matters to you. Adopting this price, the researchers have found out up to 50% of rural households and 20% of urban households cannot afford 2 thalis per day as part of food expenditure. Meaning, they are not able to spend more than 60 rupees if you are able to get 2 thalis. If you are able to get 2 thalis, that is lunch and dinner or breakfast and dinner, whatever you take into account, that now is indicative of a very dangerous concept. Which means that if 2 thalis is the minimum standard of food which is taken into account, 50% of rural India can't have 2 thalis per day. Mean they're having one wholesome meal in that regard. They are not able to spend more than rupees 30 on their food. Now, this is where this is more indicative of what is actually happening on the ground. So, based on their methodology, the idea is that per thali rupees 30, if you are having 2 thalis per day, you are 2 or more, then it is basically the concept of having a concept of above the poverty line understanding. But 50% of rural India and 20% of urban India can't afford 2 thalis itself. Yes, random videos, yes. So they are using the expenditure which they make on every other household item and then taking the residual in food and then coming to the conclusion, can that household afford for 2 thalis per person per day? And that is basically rupees 60 is the minimum in that regard. If most of the 50%, half of rural India can't put more than 1 thali on their table. And this is where the whole concept totally demolishes this idea of the world wealth. Now, let's try to understand it in the context of how you will use it in the examination. The calorific method talks about 2400 calories, 2100 calories. The expenditure method talks about a certain income. What the thali method does is it takes into account every other household consumption. Along with that, it also takes in nutrition and then argues that, okay, if 2 thalis is the threshold of being above the poverty line, 50% of India, 50% rural India cannot afford 2 thalis and 20% of urban India cannot afford 2 thalis. It is only 1 thali which they are able to push through, which means that whatever data has come through from the World Bank is non-indicative of what is the realities. So, the thali method has given us a more realistic picture of what poverty looks like in India. Do we understand this concept now? 2 things have been established. What are the methods we've used previously? And second, how does the thali method work? I want everybody's yes, because I can only move forward from this point if you understand what is the thali method. Takes into account nutrition, then makes it as a one basket as a thali. Thereafter accounts for the expenditure which is to be made rupees 30, and thereafter 2 thalis is considered to be the minimum threshold to be above the poverty line. 50% can't, 20% can. Perfect. Now, then how is WHO? WHO Shri is coming to this conclusion based on an expenditure method where the basket is non-indicative and they are taking food as the primary expenditure itself. So the data which they're using is problematic. Rather than just taking into account the concept of other expenditures, what the holistic nature of the thali method gives you a more understanding. Food if you have a lot of money, you will eat good food. If you have, for example, 1000 rupees and your expenditure on everything is 800 rupees, you will not be able to spend too much. This is not taken into account. World Bank accounting is based on international standards. That is not indicative of the grassroots realities in India itself. Okay. Now, using your residual knowledge, basic general knowledge, logic, if food is a problem, then what is that government scheme which could help in making sure that the thali could be then given to the people? Or rural India and urban India, how can we make the thali more accessible? Any one specific scheme which has been there since time immemorial India? Very good random videos according to only thali expenditure. Yes, this is only for thali. Very good. Public distribution system, PDS. Food distribution via the public distribution system, PDS is the answer. Yes, very good. So the answer to this concept would be that if thali is an indicator and rupees 30 is what they cannot afford, then the best way to encounter it is through the PDS. I think we all, that is now called the Annadata, whatever it is called, the idea is called the public distribution system, PDS. Right? Every state government and the central government has different forms of food distribution networks. Very good. So the PDS would be the answer to make sure that the gap between that rupees 30 can be met. Now, this is where the researchers further complicated the concept. What they argue is, they talk about the effectiveness of the PDS itself. Now, tell me one thing. There is one household A and there's one household B. Both are farmers. Both are farmers. Now, as you know that because farmers don't give income tax and PDS generally is based on the concept of having a ration card in that regard, and forging a ration card and having a ration card is not a very out of the box thing in rural India if you are influential. Now, this A has 100 acres of land and he has only 1 kattha of land. Now, according to the government of India, this 100 acres is not accounted for when the ration card was introduced in that way, right? Or rather the ration card was given, because this person does not actually produce on 100 acres. He only produces on 1 acre. Now, the irony of this system is this person also has a ration card. This person also has a ration card. Now, you tell me, does A actually deserve to have a ration card in the larger scheme of things, even if income is taken into account, but forging that data or getting a certificate which says that you have an income less than a certain amount is very easy in rural India when it comes to tehsildari or when it comes to talukdari. So does A deserve a ration card within the PDS system of India? Does it? No. I told you it is a two-way interaction, have to be more on your feet. Yes. No, sir. No. A does not deserve to have a ration card vis-a-vis B. B is the real one. B is the person for which PDS has been made, not A. But the problem is that ration cards are issued to A and B both, and the food which is provided is also equal in that regard. And this is where they point out a very interesting concept. They point out that subsidies are actually going to the households which can afford that food also. 90 to 95% receive 88% of that subsidy, who are already the people who can afford more than 2 thalis a day. And therefore, there is a significant leakage when it comes to rural India. Same way, 80% of subsidies are going in the distribution system to people who don't need it. And this is where PDS has one major issue, which is it is not able to understand. A PDS system is not able to differentiate between, if it is not taking into account thali. That is where they're saying if thali is taken as a concept, it is not able to differentiate itself. And this is where the problem lies, that there is subsidy going in the wrong direction because there is no differentiation in income or expenditure understanding. But what is even more significant, and I'll bring everything into one slide, don't worry. What is even more interesting is that when it comes to the thali itself, cereal consumption, which is rice, wheat, whatever it may be, is more or less equal for both the urban, rural, rich and poor. Meaning the poor and the, you can say, rich, both are eating more or less equal amount of rice, which is cereal consumption is nearly equal across all consumption. And that is actually true. Now, I'll give you a very simple example to prove this, and you will automatically understand what I mean by that. When you go to a restaurant, what is the differentiating factor between you and the next table if you are ordering something Indian, for example, North Indian thali? Both will order rice, both will order roti, both will order naan, both will order some form of cereal. What is the differentiating factor between you and the next table? Think of it. Very standard, very basic concept. The differentiating factor is most probably going to be the sabzi which you're going to have or the pulses which you're going to have. For example, if my budget is only 100 rupees, I will order roti and dal and maybe one mixed veg. Thereafter, if my budget is 600 rupees, I may have paneer and my dal now becomes dal makhani. Therefore, as it turns out, if you only look at consumption in a one-dimensional way, you will realize the real differentiating factor between a rich and a poor is the amount of pulses which they eat and the amount of protein which they take. This is where they argue that the PDS system needs to change. It needs to take into account pulses consumption, pulses distribution, and also protein intake in that way. Now, this is where this article is quite interesting because it talks about how we can complicate the landscape of the PDS, at the same point of time change our understanding of how we look at household consumption itself. So let's do one thing. Let's bring everything on one slide because I've talked about a lot of things in the past half an hour. Let's bring everything into one slide. Let's make a mind map which we can use in the examination. Can we do that? This is the basic conclusion which they come up to. I'll come back to this. Can I make a mind map where we can basically use all of this data together to then come to a certain conclusion? Yes, sir. Beautiful. Now, see. When we talk about poverty in India, we have used, you can say, calories based accounting. We have used expenditure method. Now, what these two researchers do is they marry these two concepts together to create a new concept which is called thali method. Calories just takes into account the amount of energy, and this only takes into account the expenditure. But the thali method takes into account the concept of nutrition, and the concept is more holistic because now it also takes into account the concept of other consumptions also. Now, based on the thali method, the baseline which is created for poverty is 2 thalis per day. Now, according to this data, 50% rural, 20% urban. They are below, they can afford only one thali or less. Which means that a very significant number of the population in rural India cannot afford two thalis, therefore, according to thali method, under the poverty line in that. Now, within the thali itself, the best way to remedy this would have been the PDS. But the problem is PDS is a cereal based system because they distribute more wheat and rice than actually the pulses in that regard. This creates an issue. It does not take into account nutrition and the amount of pulses or protein is not taken into account. Therefore, the conclusion is we need to understand thali method where we are concentrating on pulse consumption or protein consumption. And this is the new concept which they've tried to introduce to you via the Hindu newspaper. Other consumption means, Chirag, it would be, other consumption would be rent, transportation, education, everything else. So this is basically the idea here. That what is the conclusion they come up with? That we have proposed the expansion of PDS in direction of food into the more to the least of, which is the leakages should be stopped, especially pulses, to eliminate this problem and meet the two thali per day concept. So this is basically the idea of this article. As I told you, quite interesting that way. Something new which we've not seen previously. We get this, can you use this in the examination? If they ask you for an alternative. But one thing which they've given us as good data is this, which is that cereal consumption is more or less the same for rich and poor. It is the protein which matters, right? So if they ask you a question like this, there is a need to change our approach in the PDS regime. A cereal based computation is misleading. Explain. Will you be able to answer this question? But sir, when cereals increase, the nutrition also increases. No, that is not true, Amrita. When you're taking more and more carbohydrates, you will get less microvitamins and vitamins. The development of a child, the stunting and wasting which is happening is because of critical minerals and critical vitamins along with protein deficiency. Protein deficiency along with mineral deficiency and vitamin deficiency can all, one of them being iron, can lead to anemia. So having more rice and wheat with less pulses is not a balanced diet. So Amrita, I hope that you understand that if we are going into the PDS system and we are only distributing wheat and rice, we are just giving more and more carbohydrates to the family. The carbohydrates are only going to be consumed, but there will be no balanced diet. Therefore, that is why this is a better method. It takes into account nutrition. It talks about how the household should have enough amount of protein along with microvitamins and vitamins and minerals along with the concept of carbohydrates. So, and this is where the whole concept is. If the government talks about PDS, it says everybody is consuming the same amount of carbohydrate. But that is not, yes, the hidden hunger, the disguised form of hunger which is there is this only. So nutrition will not increase with increase in hunger. I hope you understand. With the increase in carbohydrates. Do we understand this concept? I told you a complicated concept. Has taken me now close to 35 minutes to cover this, but I hope it's been worth it. If I will keep on doing this for all the topics. I hope you understand what this concept is. Please don't use it as a method for accounting in the examination. This is a proposed concept, a new concept which two people have talked about. Something quite interesting, but I hope that is clear. Right? I have everybody's consent to move forward, right? Yes, sir. No, sir. Okay, sir. Now, before I go to the Doha and the Qatar issue, we have to first discuss this and then talk about this. Now, there has been a very alarming development which is coming through from Saudi Arabia, which is a mutual non-aggression and a mutual defense cooperation agreement, which has, sir, does rupees 30 include other expenditures? No, only rupees 30 for that thali. Over and above everything, rupees 30 per thali is the cost. That is the cost of the thali. Meaning, over and above all expenditure, 60 rupees is minimum for that thalis. Right. Now, this is a very alarming development because this comprehensive national security complex and this mutual defense agreement which has happened between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, it is quite problematic. Replacing cereals with millets can be a holistic approach. It is still not going to give you that much level of protein. Millets could be an alternative food, sure. But in India, already a lot of our farmers are eating millets because they don't have access to rice and you can say wheat. So millets is mostly a part of the diet. Bajra, ragi are already a part of the diet of farmers. So it's not that it is the problem. And in India, wheat and rice is considered to be more premium than now the government is pushing millet. But millet is a more coarse grain. And people will rather not eat that. In rural India, if you're eating a coarse grain, that is also a indicator of social status. So it's not that simple. It's not that simple. Okay. Now, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia has signed a mutual defense agreement under which, and this is the dangerous line, any aggression against either country shall be considered an aggression against both. Now, if you have done your world history, this line should not be new to you. This exact same principle is followed by one organization in the world. What is that organization? Mutual non-aggression and aggression towards one is aggression to all. What is that organization which uses this principle? Come on, revise with me. What is that organization? Very good. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. This is a NATO principle. NATO works on two principles, which is the joint command concept, and the second one is the concept of any aggression to either country's aggression to the concept of each or both, which is mutual non-aggression. Aggression towards one is aggression to all. The concept of collective security and the collective security complex which exists. Now, why is this problematic? Is because firstly, Saudi Arabia was a good and a very reliable partner for India when it comes to its fight against terrorism vis-a-vis Pakistan. So we are one of the most important importers of oil from Saudi Arabia. We have a very flourishing trade with it. We have been, in a way, having a very good, with Mohammed bin Salman, we have had a very good relationship. But this shift of Saudi Arabia from a partner which is mostly dependent on it, this is problematic. This has just happened 2 to 3 days ago, and the Ministry of External Affairs is studying the implications of this. Now, why am I saying this? Why am I saying this? Is because now, see, Pakistan is Pakistan. Pakistan will do something foolish very soon. And the foolishness can lead to Operation Sindhu. But the idea is very simple. Previously, it was a bilateral issue. Now, under these concepts, it becomes a multilateral issue. Because if India then does a surgical strike or any form of covert operation in Pakistan, Pakistan can claim it to be an aggression on its soil, and therefore Saudi Arabia automatically gets involved. Now, how enforceable is this? How serious is Saudi Arabia? The idea is that the noise which is coming, the humiliation which the Pakistani Prime Minister faced at the SCO has now translated in an Islamic Republic and an Islamic Republic level cooperation. And this is where this is an alarming development for India in the larger scheme of things. Because now Pakistan is finding multilateral partners, it is finding bilateral cooperation vis-a-vis any form of aggression from India in that regard. And this is now going to complicate the West Asian landscape even more. And that is why when we talk about this Doha strike and how India has responded to it, we have to take into account what has happened with Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. We will get 2-3 articles very soon, maybe tomorrow, day after, also very, very soon. We will get something for sure as an editorial on this. But the idea is Pakistan, its movement towards America and the American way of balancing India via Pakistan has now translated into US in a way, could be brokering this also. US, because it's a very important partner of the Saudi Arabians, there is now a certain trilateral cooperation here where Pakistan is getting support from Saudi Arabia and US both. And therefore, now if you look at this and see how India has responded to what has happened in Doha recently, that is where things are now becoming interesting. Now, recently what has happened is on Qatari soil, in Doha, in a house, there were certain Hamas leaders who were meeting to understand the latest ceasefire proposal proposed by US. And Israel used this opportunity to neutralize all of them, killing all 5 of them. But it was a military strike, a very targeted strike on that house in Doha on Qatari soil. This is basically where Israel is now changing the landscape. It does not care if you're a US ally. It does not care if you have a US base. It is, in a way, striking multiple countries at this point of time. But what is more interesting is how has India responded to this? And that is where, see, India previously, when it came to Lebanon, Yemen, Tunisia, Syria or Iran, when Israel struck, we did not say anything. I'll give you the whole account for how India responded to it. But India has argued that the bombing by Israel in Doha is a violation of sovereignty and therefore we condemn it. And this is quite different to the way India responds. Because if you go by Indian response, when the Israelis bombed the Iranian embassy, we expressed concern. When the Israelis attacked the UN peacekeeping post in southern Lebanon, we again expressed concern. Previously, when there were pager bombs of Hezbollah, very major attack in September 2024, we said it's a masterstroke. Then Israeli-US strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities, we said let's have dialogue. Then when Iran retaliated, we said we should go for peace, no specific response. SCO, when it condemned the strikes on Iran, India disassociated itself. But when the SCO recently talked about Israel and US doing terrorism in the name of what is called as democracy, India then signed the declaration. Now, this is where India has been changing its stance from time to time in the Middle Eastern sector. Sometimes it is a mild approach, sometimes it is consistent, sometimes it is contradictory, sometimes it is cautious. But Doha strike, India has very, you can say, vocally condemned the actions of Israel. Now the question is why? Why? Why did India not care about Lebanon, Tunisia, Syria or Yemen? But why did it care when it happened on Qatar? And the answer to that question is this. India and Qatar are very, very important trade partners, be it bilateral, be it based on education, be it based on economic ties, be it defense. So the bilateral ties of India and Qatar are extremely important. And with Saudi Arabia sitting on Pakistan's side, we now need Qatar. So therefore, now we are trying to align ourselves with Qatar and condemning the Israeli action in the concept of Doha strikes because Saudi Arabia is sitting with Pakistan. This is where we are trying to balance it. We never condemned anything so vocally previously. We have not even talked about Gaza that much. But the idea is because Qatari relationship is important to us with Saudi Arabia pushing or going towards Pakistan, this is India balancing its approach. Now, the question is, does this make sense in the larger scheme of things which we are doing in West Asia? And that is where this article says that this is even more complicated. Why? Because see, India is now on a tightrope. It has to balance Israel, it has to balance Qatar, it has to balance the US in this sector, it has to also now counter what is the Saudi Arabian and Pakistani defense agreement, and The problem is that India mostly has been extremely silent on the issue of Gaza. The Israeli strikes and the systematic extermination of the Gaza Strip in that regard, India has not talked about anything generally. The problem is this is complicating the relationship of India with Qatar also. So at one level, we are not doing anything when it comes to the Gaza strikes, and the Arab countries which have solidarity with the Muslims in Gaza Strip. That is where now India is in a proper, you can say, multilateral mess. So let's try to make sense of what is happening as of right now. Now, India, as of right now, it had a very important partner, which was Saudi Arabia. But now Saudi Arabia is moving towards Pakistan, and they have a certain mutual aggression, non-aggression treaty. And most probably the US is involved because US is also a very good partner of both these countries. Now, this is where India has an issue. India now is trying to develop a better relationship with Qatar, and that is based on the idea of balancing this. But the problem is India also has a very good relationship with Israel. So now it becomes this. And because Israel is hitting in Gaza, and Gaza is generally, or the issue of the Arab nations feel as it is threatened by Israel, now this is going to complicate this one. Now, therefore, India, as of right now, has to balance Israel, Arab world, USA, Russia, China, SCO, and also at the same point of time, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Nepal. I hope now you understand what is the mess in which we are as of right now. Yes, recently, without naming Pakistan, recently they said. EU is not a defense issue. EU is not a defense issue. EU is a more environment and green policy issue. This is all based on defense and national security. EU is not a national security threat. It is the national security issue comes from Israel, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal. All of them are very important defense partners. So what this article says is India has to now be consistent, but at the same point of time, what India is doing is called transactional diplomacy. You give us something, we will give you something. Transactional diplomacy has a chance of going very haywire if you're not able to balance all sides. Basically, if you're playing all sides, all alignment is very difficult to do if everybody has a secret alliance within themselves. So therefore, a question like this is expected. India is navigating transactional diplomacy in West Asia, but it is increasingly becoming difficult to balance this zone. Explain. This is not the end of this topic, but I'm just trying to complicate your understanding of the West Asian landscape and of how India is trying to balance it. Does this make sense? What the main argument of this article is? Why is India saying something against the Doha attacks so significant? Because it is going against the principles of what India has followed as a diplomacy in West Asia. Because in multiple different zones, Israeli strikes were celebrated covertly, but this time it has been condemned because Qatar is an important partner to us. Are we clear? I hope you are alive, and what we've discussed till this point are only three things. There's a Pakistan and Saudi Arabian Defense Pact, mutual non-aggression, third-party aggression agreement. We've discussed the concept of the thali method, how the concept of 2 thali per day is the minimum balance or minimum threshold for being above the poverty line. And we've discussed how the Qatari attacks have been responded by India, breaking its protocol previously. If these three topics are clear, then I move to the next set. Are we clear? Yes or no? Yes, sir. Okay. Now, as we speak, there is a protest which is going on in Maharashtra over onion prices. Now, to give you a basic understanding of this is something which India goes through every year. But as of right now, because our export landscape is complicated, this has become even more complicated. Now, there's something called domestic overproduction. Must have heard about this concept for the Great Depression, called domestic overproduction. Domestic overproduction is very simple. Because supply always chases demand, there is always a chance that when the supply reaches the demand levels, the demand falls because of external factors or because of, for example, certain factors, be it internationally or internal. Now, what has been happening for onion is that this year, as we speak today, there has been more production or overproduction, and the stock which the different agencies hold, I'll tell you the agencies, that is also at the all-time high. And the overproduction is being pushed into storages, and the storages which already have the rabi crop, they are also now rotting. So therefore, there is a major oversupply of onion, first because of extra produce, and the other because the buffer stock is already quite high. So now onion is being sold at a giveaway price across Indian cities. Now farmers, what they're realizing is that the per quintal cost as of right now of onion is less than the production cost. And because demand is very finicky, see, demand changes very quickly. Supply takes time to change. Now, the best option in an oversupply situation, best option is export of onions in that regard. But there are two locations which were the most important partners or two very important locations of export of onions, which is Bangladesh, complicated relationship with Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. And in both, what has happened is now both have reduced their, Bangladesh more or less major drastic change, Sri Lanka reduction, and China has also started to supply both. Now in this case, what is happening is that there is no scope for export, and there is too much internal production, and there's too much buffer stock, together creating a situation in which now India is in a crisis when it comes to onion prices. Onion prices as of right now are so low that the farmer is throwing it away, selling it at a throwaway price. So on 12th September, there was a protest across Maharashtra over the onion prices and the market prices of onion. They are demanding immediate intervention by the government to fix the per quintal cost of buying of onions in the mandis itself. So as of right now, the current farmer's earning is 800 to 1000 per quintal. Demand is high, supply is low, supply is high, demand. That is the basic. Demand rises very quickly, but supply changes takes time, always takes time, because you have to increase the factors of production. What can be the other countries to export it to? These were the two most important. We are exporting to others at the maximum capacity, but two major destinations have gone out. So 800 to 1000 per quintal. The production cost is 2200 to 2500 per quintal, meaning there is a half difference, 50% difference between what they're producing it for and what they're getting it in the market itself. And therefore, the farmer's loss is close to 1200 to 1700 per quintal. And the condition has got complicated because the rabi onions which were in the cold storages, they are also deteriorating, and therefore they are now being sold out at even low prices. And the two organizations, NAFED and NCCF, both are trying to buy these onions at under the what is called as price stabilization fund, but they are still buying it at this cost. So what are these two organizations? The National Cooperative Consumers Federation of India and the National Agricultural Cooperative Marketing Federation of India, NAFED and NCCF. What they do is that they promote agricultural produce and farmers' welfare. Under the price stabilization fees scheme or fund, what is called as PSF, they jointly procure, store onions as part of this concept. They create a buffer during periods of high prices. They push it. Basically, buffer stock. The use is whenever there is supply chain issues, buffer stock is pushed into the market. When there is oversupply, they buy it. When there is issues with regards to supply, they push it back. So this is the idea. But the problem this time has happened is supply is also too much and the buffer stock is also at the all-time high. Together, what is happening is now the price, there is oversupply. When supply increases, demand remains the same, the prices are going to fall very quickly. Middleman issue may be there, but the problem here is domestic oversupply is such that you can't really match it. Therefore, farmers are demanding that NAFED and NCCF should not sell what they have in these cities itself. They should stop procuring, and like Andhra Pradesh, which is now giving 1500 as base price per quintal, they are saying that it should be there for all. So Maharashtra farmers are saying emulate what the Andhra Pradesh government is doing, 1500 rupees per quintal rate. The problem is Bangladesh and Sri Lanka has been lost. China, Pakistan are also gaining in these countries. Wherever there was a shortage, China and Pakistan have supplied. Therefore, the only thing as of right now, which seems to be the only way the farmers are going to get any form of, you can say, respite is Andhra Pradesh procurement scheme model, which is take it at a certain price. So let's do one thing. Let's take this into account. So when we talk about onions, the concept is you have oversupply, you have already buffer stock, and the issue is exports are falling. To give you the data for that, the exports have gone from 225 lakh tons to 11 lakh tons. Again, close to half in that regard. So exports are falling, and NCCF and NAFED are procuring also and selling also. All of this means that there is major oversupply. And with oversupply, there will always be decrease in prices. What is the solution? Andhra model, which is fixed procurement price. Sorted? Nothing out of the box. Simple, straightforward. Nothing out of the box. Very straightforward article. Generally explaining to you what is the issue. I want everybody's consent here. Then we move to the last two topics. The next one is a little bit, you can say, data heavy, but I've tried to make sense of it as much as possible. Are we clear? Yes, sir. Come on, tell me. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay, great. Now, this is based on, this is an article which basically gives you some data which you can use for the examination in order to complicate certain concepts. So recently in the Sustainable Development Goals, ranking India improved from 109 to 99. And that is being argued as a major development for India in that regard, that we have within 167 countries, significant improvement in our ranking. But what he argues, what the author argues is, when it comes to SDG 3, we are still quite far off. And SDG 3, which is good health and well-being, he gives you data to argue that we are still quite far off. Now, that data is valuable for you in the larger scheme of things because it allows you to understand and contextualize things. So what he does is he gives you the data to complicate this concept. He tells you what are the issues, and then he talks about the way forwards. And that way, it's a very complete package, allows you to answer all the aspects of that you can say article or that question. If there's a question that India is still far off. So for example, if you get a question like this, which is India has a long way to go to meet its targets of SDG 3, you need issue, reason, way forward. This is what this article gives you also. So what is the issue? The issue is that when we talk about the indicators for SDG 3, good health and well-being, maternal mortality rate, which is the death of a woman in pregnancy or 42 days after the pregnancy is terminated, that is at 97 per deaths. The target was 70, way off. Under 5 mortality rate after birth till age 5, 32 per 1,000 live births, 25 is the target, still quite high looked vis-a-vis developed countries. Life expectancy in India 70 years, 73 years, still lagging behind, but we are meeting this more or less. Out of pocket expenditure in health, 13% of household consumption, 7% is our target. Again, very, very far off. When we talk about immunization, good percentage, 100% is expected, 93%. So if you look at the death rate of women in pregnancy or after pregnancy, 42 days, if you look at children death after birth till 5 years, and if you look at the out-of-pocket expenditure in the healthcare sector, you automatically realize that we are still quite far off in that regard. This is the problem statement. This is the issue. Now the question would be, why is this there? So what are the fundamental issues? So he identifies 3. The out-of-pocket means if you have health insurance, Amrita, what you are giving out of your pocket over and above any form of aid which you get. So if I have a health insurance and still I have to pay 50,000 rupees over and above, if the bill was 50,000, I'm paying 10,000 is covered by insurance. I'm paying 40,000 out of pocket. Out of pocket is bad. You can remind my understanding with regards to your thoughts. I'll talk about this. I'll talk about it at the end. You can do that. You can do that. You can do that. Okay. So limited access to quality healthcare. This is the first issue. Healthcare, there is systemic issue. Poor infrastructure, economic constraints, standard. We already know that the doctor to patient ratio in India is already problematic. Second is non-economic factors, for example, nutrition, hygiene, sanitation. These still remain issues in the concept of rural India. And third, he says that there's a lot of issue with regards to mental health, and health awareness is very low in India. So when we talk about these indicators, what are the fundamental issues or the reasons why we have this? We have poor infrastructure, economic constraints are there, poor nutrition, lifestyle choices are bad, and health, hygiene, and the awareness towards health is very, very low. So, issue, a reason. Now, very simply, how to take this forward? What should be our approach to take it forward? Simple. A 3-pronged approach. 3-pronged approach. First, we should move towards universal health insurance. I have already discussed how health insurance is not the answer. On the same platform, I've discussed in length how health insurance should not be the answer generally, because health insurance in turn promotes private sector and profiteering in that regard. But health insurance, universal health insurance, is something which at least can reduce the out-of-pocket expenditure. World Bank says that if we can do that, there is a major difference in health targets in that sense. This is important. Primary healthcare centers should be strengthened so that people have good infrastructure. This is the point which we talked about in that article also, that in insurance we have to spend on hospitals, not on insurance companies. And last is digital health tools and telemedicine, and all these things should be used to create awareness. So let's do one thing. Let's bring everything together. Maternal mortality rate high, in under 5 mortality rate high, life expectancy stagnant, and out of pocket expenditure high. This is the problem. What is the reason? One of the reasons why I make this in front of you is because this is how you make notes out of current affairs. What are the reasons? The reasons are very straightforward and simple. We have infrastructure issues. Primary healthcare centers are not there. Further, we have what is called as poor health awareness. Hygiene is an issue. Accessibility is an issue. And the problem of doctor to patient ratio. Patient ratio is very, very high. Now the last thing would be, what is the way forward? Way forward is, first, universal health insurance. Second would be digital awareness. And third would be helping primary healthcare centers. Sorted, everyone? These are the 3 basic approaches which we've talked about. Issue, reason, way forward. I hope you will be able to use this data in the examination. This is the whole point of this discussion. Right? Yes, sir. Very good. So, before I talk about the last topic, what have we learned? We have learned that Pakistan and Saudi Arabia are now in a defense agreement. We have learned that India has changed its protocol with regards to Qatar because of this movement and condemned the actions of Israel. We have also learned that there is something called the thali method, which takes into account nutrition, is more holistic, and 2 thalis is considered to be very, very important. We also have taken into account the concept of what is called as why SDG 3 we are meeting and deficient in that regard. And last but not the least, we also studied the concept of what is called as thali and yes, the issue with regards to onion farmers. Onion. Domestic oversupply, no export, and buffer stock is at the highest. This is what we discussed. Yes. Sir, also the prevention is not the well equipped and given accurate. Yes, that is true. That is what Tarak has to be strengthened. Yes. Okay. So last topic. India is now again in trouble because of taking on US by the horns in that regard. Chabahar port is a port which India has been developing in Iran for a very long time. And previously it was considered to be a very important port for Afghanistan's connectivity, because India and US used to cooperate over Afghanistan. There used to be, there is already a sanction which is there on Iran over its nuclear compliance and nuclear deal. But in 2018, Iran Freedom and Counter Proliferation Act, there was a waiver which was given to India so as to develop the Chabahar port for the US and for India. And for India, it was a very important way of countering the Belt and Road Initiative and China and Gwadar port. So Gwadar port was being developed by China in Pakistan. India was developing Chabahar port in Iran, and India was basically developing this to bypass Pakistan to connect to the Central Asian world. Now the problem is that with Trump administration not taking too kindly to what India has been doing and what Iran has been doing, Marco Rubio has now argued that we are going to create maximum pressure on Iran to be isolated. In this process, what is going to happen is India, which was developing the Shahid Beheshti terminal in Chabahar and had already spent 200 crores out of the 400 for a 10-year deal, now it is going to get complicated. Now it is going to get complicated because India cannot now develop this port further because it cannot now actually trade out of it. The trade was developing also. There were 43% increase and 34% traffic increase was there. So India now, if you look at it in the West Asian sector as a concluding remark, is in trouble right now because Pakistan, Saudi Arabia are coming together. Thereafter, there is also an issue that Pakistan, Saudi Arabia together, Israel is striking US allies and Indian allies in that regard. Chabahar cannot be developed further. Pakistan is now very close to the US. China cannot be trusted. Russia is an all-weather friend. But because we don't respond to what is happening in Gaza and we have this stance which we've taken, it is a complicated mess in which we are there. So please do understand this point that it is a very critical situation how India responds to all of these things as of right now and in the next 10 to 15 years or at least in the next 4 to 5 years is going to dictate how India is seen by the Arab world in that regard. So I hope that now with this you understand everything. Remember to join me at 1 p.m. for Medieval India through timelines on the Unacademy platform. And I hope everything is now clear. 6 very critical articles. I'll see you tomorrow and day after also. Thank you. What are the rationale behind monthly current affairs initiative? See, the whole point is that this is micro, meaning if you are doing 50 topics through CNA, in the monthly current affairs, only 20 to 25 critical topics will be done. So the difference is of macro and micro. So what I'm expecting is I can't see your name. Whatever your name is, and what your understanding is very simple is if you are doing monthly current affairs, you are looking at the macro picture. If you are looking at the CNA, you are then looking at the micro. Meaning out of this, not everything will be taught in the MCA in that regard. So this is for understanding at the day-to-day level, that is for macro. Is MCA good enough? Yes. Is following this good enough? Yes. If you can follow both, perfect. Totally your call. Either way you can help. What is universal insurance? If everybody has health insurance, if they reach to a hospital, out-of-pocket expenditure falls on people. Right? Okay. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye. I'll see you tomorrow, same time, 10 a.m. Bye-bye.